At 8:17 on a rainy Thursday night, James Maddox had just finished singing his 6-year-old son to sleep. The doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. Over 2 weeks ago, he had quit his job. No backup plan, no savings beyond a few months. His son was all he had left. When he opened the door, his breath caught. Standing in the pouring rain was Rachel Samuel, CEO of the company he had just walked away from. Soaking wet, no umbrella, no driver. She looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I accepted you quitting, but I won't accept losing you." But to understand how Rachel Samuel ended up standing in the rain outside a small house in northeast Philadelphia, we need to go back 3 weeks. James Maddox woke at 5:45 every morning, always before the alarm. It was a habit born from 2 years of single fatherhood, 2 years since Denise lost her battle with cancer and left him alone with their son. The house was quiet as he moved through his routine. Coffee first, then breakfast prep. He laid out Marcus's clothes the night before, packed the lunch the night before, checked the backpack the night before. Everything had to be ready, because mornings with a 6-year-old were unpredictable, and James had learned that preparation was the only weapon against chaos. On the refrigerator door, held up by a magnet shaped like a dinosaur, was Marcus's latest drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small. Underneath, in the shaky handwriting of a first-grader, "Dad and me, forever." There was no third figure. There hadn't been one in any of Marcus's drawings since the funeral. James stared at it for a moment longer than he should have, then turned back to the stove. At Samuel Industries, James was the only black senior manager in the building. He had worked his way up over 7 years from entry-level analyst to senior operations manager. Every promotion came with whispers. Every success came with the unspoken assumption that he had been given something rather than earned it. So James worked harder, arrived earlier, stayed later, never complained, never showed weakness. In meetings, he spoke only when he had something valuable to say. He triple-checked every report. He dressed sharper than his colleagues, prepared more thoroughly than anyone else in the room, because he knew the truth that every black professional in America understood he had to be twice as good to be seen as equal. That Tuesday morning during a quarterly review meeting, James was presenting the operations forecast when one of the other senior managers, a man named Bradley, who had been with the company half as long, interrupted him mid-sentence. "I think what James is trying to say is, let him finish." The voice came from the head of the table. Rachel Samuel, CEO, sat with her hands folded, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek twist, her expression unreadable. The room went silent. Bradley's face reddened. "I was just trying to help clarify. Mr. Maddox's presentation is perfectly clear." Rachel's tone left no room for argument. "Continue, James." James nodded and resumed his presentation. But he noticed something as he spoke. Rachel's gaze lingered on him a second longer than necessary, not in a way that made him uncomfortable, in a way that made him feel seen. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, James gathered his materials. Rachel passed by his chair without stopping, but she said something under her breath so quiet, only he could hear. "Well done." Then she was gone. It was such a small moment, but James found himself thinking about it for the rest of the day. The call from Marcus's school came on a Wednesday afternoon. "Mr. Maddox, your son is in the nurse's office. He's been crying for about 20 minutes and asking for you. We can't seem to calm him down." James was in the middle of reviewing a critical supply chain report. Deadlines were stacking up. His inbox was overflowing. None of it mattered. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, ignoring the looks from colleagues who watched him leave in the middle of the workday. He could feel their judgment, the unspoken accusation that he wasn't committed enough, wasn't serious enough about his career. At the school, he found Marcus curled up on a cot in the nurse's office, his small body shaking with sobs. The moment Marcus saw his father, he launched himself into James's arms. "Daddy, you came." "Of course I came, buddy." James held him tight, feeling his son's tears soak through his dress shirt. "What happened?" Marcus buried his face in James's chest. His voice came out muffled, broken. "I had a dream. You went away. Like Mommy." James felt something crack inside him. He had been so focused on keeping everything together, the job, the house, the bills, that he hadn't seen what was happening to his son. Marcus wasn't just grieving. He was terrified of being abandoned again. "Hey, look at me." James pulled back just enough to see his son's face. "I'm not going anywhere, okay, I promise." Marcus sniffled. "But you're always at work." The words hit James like a punch to the chest, because Marcus was right. James was always at work, always proving himself, always chasing something that kept him away from the one person who needed him most. "I know, buddy," James whispered. "I know." That night, long after Marcus had fallen asleep, James's phone rang. It was almost 11. The caller ID showed a number he recognized, Rachel Samuel's direct line. "Mr. Maddox, I apologize for the late hour." Her voice was crisp, professional. "I need your input on the Henderson proposal before tomorrow's board meeting." James rubbed his eyes. He was exhausted. "But this was the CEO. You didn't say no to the CEO." "Of course. Give me a moment to pull up the file." They talked through the proposal for about 20 minutes, but then the conversation shifted slowly, almost imperceptibly, from quarterly projections to something else. "I noticed you left early today," Rachel said. There was no accusation in her tone, just observation. "My son needed me. Is he all right?" The question surprised James. In his years of working at Samuel Industries, he had never heard her ask about anyone's personal life. She was known for her laser focus on results, her complete separation of business and everything else. "He's struggling," James admitted, not sure why he was telling her this. "Since his mother passed, he's been having nightmares. He's afraid I'm going to disappear too." Silence on the other end of the line, then softer than he had ever heard her speak. "How old is he? 6? Another silence. When Rachel spoke again, her voice had changed. The corporate Polish was gone. "My father worked constantly when I was growing up. He was building this company. I used to wait by the window for him to come home." She stopped herself as if surprised by her own confession. "I'm sorry. That's not relevant." "No," James said quietly. "It is." For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was a strange intimacy, two people in the dark miles apart, connected only by phone signals and the weight of things left unsaid. Then James heard it, a small voice from the hallway. "Daddy!" Marcus stood in the doorway of his bedroom, clutching his stuffed elephant, his eyes wide with fear. "I have to go," James said into the phone. "Of course." Rachel's voice was gentle now. "Go be with your son." After that night, things changed at work. James's meeting schedule became lighter, his deadlines more flexible. He was approved for 2 days of remote work per week, something no one at his level had ever received. He didn't know who was responsible, but he suspected. One evening, staying late to finish a report, James passed by the executive floor. Through the glass wall of her office, he could see Rachel at her desk, alone reviewing documents. It was past 8 o'clock. The building was nearly empty. She looked up and saw him. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then she gave him a small nod, not a smile, but something close to it, and returned to her work. James went home. The merger announcement came 6 weeks later. Samuel Industries was being acquired by a larger corporation. The deal was worth billions. Rachel would remain CEO, but the company would undergo restructuring. What that meant in practice was chaos. Overnight, James's workload tripled. Conference calls at midnight, reports due at dawn, emergency meetings on weekends. The 2 days of remote work vanished. The flexible schedule disappeared. James tried to manage. He hired a babysitter for Marcus. He worked on his laptop while cooking dinner. He answered emails during bath time. He told himself it was temporary, that things would calm down once the merger was complete. But Marcus knew. Children always know. One night, James came home at 10 o'clock. The babysitter was waiting by the door, looking exhausted. "He wouldn't sleep," she said. "He's been sitting by the window since 7. James found Marcus in the living room, curled up on the couch by the window, still dressed in his school clothes. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. "Hey, buddy." James sat down beside him. "I'm sorry I'm late." Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he reached under the couch cushion and pulled out a piece of paper. A drawing. James looked at it and his heart stopped. It was a single figure. A small boy standing alone. No father, no one else. "Where am I?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's answer was quiet, matter of fact, devastating. "You're at work, Daddy. You're always at work." That night, after Marcus finally fell asleep, James sat alone in the kitchen. The drawing lay on the table in front of him. He stared at it for a long time. His phone buzzed. Rachel's number. He answered, but he didn't speak first. "James?" Her voice was concerned. "Are you all right?" "No." The word came out before he could stop it. "I'm not all right." "What's wrong?" "I'm losing him." James's voice cracked. "My son. I'm losing him. Every night I come home late, every morning I leave before he wakes up. I'm becoming exactly what I promised myself I would never be." "What do you mean?" "Do you know what the world sees when they look at a black father? They see absence. They see statistics. They see every stereotype about men who don't show up for their kids." James took a breath, trying to steady himself. "I swore I would be different. I swore my son would never feel abandoned. And now look at me. I'm giving everything to a job while my son draws pictures of himself alone." The line was silent. James could hear Rachel breathing, could almost feel her searching for words. "James, I have to go." He hung up before she could respond. The next morning, James wrote his resignation letter. It was 3 sentences long. He didn't ask for a counteroffer. He didn't request a meeting. He simply stated that he was leaving effective immediately and thanked Rachel for the opportunity. He sent the email at 7:15, right before Marcus woke up. Then he made breakfast pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, the way Marcus liked them, and for the first time in months, he sat down and ate with his son. Rachel read the resignation email 4 times. 3 sentences. No explanation beyond the obvious. No request for negotiation. She had built her career on reading people, on anticipating moves before they happened. But she had not anticipated this. Her assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Samuel, the board call starts in 10 minutes. Cancel it." "I'm sorry, cancel the board call. Reschedule for tomorrow." Rachel never canceled board calls. In 15 years of running this company, she had joined meetings from hospital beds, from airports, from the back of cars stuck in traffic. The board call was sacred. But right now, nothing mattered except the 3 sentences on her screen. She picked up the phone and dialed James's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. By the 3rd attempt, she understood. He wasn't ignoring her. He had made his choice, and he was already living it. 2 hours later, James was sitting in her office. He had come only because she had sent a formal request through HR, the kind of request that required a response. Even in resignation, James Maddox was professional. He sat across from her desk, his posture straight, his expression calm. He was wearing jeans and a sweater. She had never seen him in anything but a suit. "I'm prepared to offer you a 40% raise," Rachel said. "Effective immediately." James shook his head. "That's not. I'm also authorizing a dedicated assistant to handle your administrative work, and your schedule will be entirely flexible. Work from home as much as you need. Come into the office only when absolutely necessary." "Ms. Samuel." "Rachel." The word came out before she could stop it. "Please, call me Rachel." James looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his eyes, not anger, not frustration, something closer to sadness. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I don't need more money. I don't need a flexible schedule. I need to be present in my son's life. Actually present, not checking emails during dinner, not taking calls during bedtime. Present. I can make that happen. Whatever you need." "No." James's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't, because this company will always need more. The merger will need more. The board will need more, and I will keep giving more because that's who I am. That's what I've been trained to do my whole life." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what my son drew last night? A picture of himself, alone, no father, just a little boy standing by himself." Rachel felt something tighten in her chest. "I have spent 7 years proving that I belong here," James continued. 7 years being the first one in and the last one out. 7 years making sure no one could ever say I didn't earn my place. And while I was doing all that, my son was learning that work matters more than he does. That's not true. It is true. Because that's what I showed him. Every late night, every missed dinner, every time I chose this company over him. James stood up. "I can't do it anymore. I won't." Rachel rose from her chair. "There has to be something, some arrangement we can make." James walked toward the door. Then he stopped his hand on the handle and turned back to face her. "There is one thing you can do for me. Anything. Let me go." He left without waiting for a response. The door clicked shut behind him, and Rachel stood alone in her corner office, surrounded by awards and achievements and everything she had spent her life building. None of it meant anything. The first week without work was strange for James. His body kept waking at 5:45, ready for a routine that no longer existed. But instead of rushing through breakfast and racing to the office, he sat with Marcus. They ate together. They talked about dinosaurs and superheroes and what shapes the clouds made. On the third day, Marcus looked up from his cereal and said, "Dad, I like when you're here in the morning." James felt his throat tighten. "I like it too, buddy." That afternoon, they went to the park. James pushed Marcus on the swings until his arms ached. They got ice cream and sat on a bench watching dogs chase each other across the grass. When Marcus got chocolate on his nose, James wiped it off with his thumb, and Marcus giggled a sound James realized he hadn't heard in months. That night, after dinner and bath time and 3 bedtime stories, Marcus fell asleep holding his father's hand. James sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, watching his son breathe. Then he went downstairs and opened his laptop to check his bank account. The number stared back at him. Enough for 3 months, maybe 4 if he was careful. After that, he would need to find something. But not yet. Not now. He closed the laptop and went to bed. At Samuel Industries, James's absence was felt immediately. Reports that he had managed were now scattered across 3 different departments. Meetings he had run were chaotic, unfocused. The integration team for the merger was struggling without his oversight. But Rachel barely noticed. She sat through meetings without hearing them. She signed documents without reading them. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. At night alone in her penthouse apartment, she found herself reaching for her phone, not to check emails, to scroll through her call history, to see his name, James Maddox. The last call was several days ago, late at night. The call where he had told her he was losing his son. The call where she had heard his voice break. She had wanted to say something. She had wanted to tell him that she understood, that she knew what it meant to be a child waiting for a parent who never came home. But she hadn't. And then he had hung up, and the next morning, he was gone. Rachel walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath her, glittering with lights. She owned property in 4 countries. She had a net worth that most people couldn't comprehend. She could buy anything, go anywhere, do anything she wanted. And yet, standing in her empty apartment at midnight, she had never felt more alone. The rumors started circulating by the end of the first week. "Did you hear about Maddox just walked out? No notice, nothing." I heard the CEO personally tried to keep him, offered him a fortune. Apparently, they were close. Very close, if you know what I mean. The whispers reached Rachel through her assistant, who mentioned them with careful neutrality during a morning briefing. Rachel's expression didn't change. She simply made a note on her tablet and moved on to the next item. But later that day, Bradley, the same manager who had interrupted James in the meeting weeks ago, appeared in her office doorway. "Miss Samuel, do you have a moment?" She didn't look up. "What is it?" Bradley stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I just wanted to say that I think Maddox leaving was probably for the best. There was talk, you know, about the special treatment he was getting, the remote work, the flexible hours." He lowered his voice. "Some people were saying he was taking advantage of your generosity." Rachel set down her pen. She looked at Bradley with the same expression she used when examining a quarterly report that didn't meet expectations. "Who was saying this?" Bradley's confidence faltered. "Well, I mean, it was just general talk, around the office." "Names." "I don't really remember specific. Then perhaps you should be more careful about repeating things you can't verify." Rachel picked up her pen again. "That will be all." Bradley left quickly. 2 weeks later, he was transferred to the company's satellite office in Cleveland. No one connected the two events, but no one at Samuel Industries ever mentioned James Maddox's name in a negative context again. But Rachel's victory felt hollow. She had silenced the rumors. She had protected James's reputation, and none of it brought him back. On the 17th day after James's resignation, Rachel made a decision. She left the office at 6 o'clock earlier than she had left in years. She drove past her apartment building without stopping. She kept driving, following the GPS on her phone to an address she had looked up in HR files. The rain started when she was halfway there. Light at first, then heavier until her windshield wipers could barely keep up. She could have turned around. She could have waited for a better day, a clearer moment. She kept driving. The house was small, modest, tucked into a quiet neighborhood in northeast Philadelphia. There was a child's bicycle on the porch. A light glowed warm in the front window. Rachel parked across the street and sat in her car, watching. Through the window, she could see movement. A tall figure, James, passing back and forth. A smaller figure bouncing on a couch. She watched them for nearly 20 minutes. She watched James pick up his son and spin him around. She watched them disappear, probably heading upstairs. She watched the light in the front window go off, then a light upstairs turn on. Bedtime. He was putting his son to bed. Rachel should have left. She had no right to be here, no claim on this man or his family. She was his former employer. Nothing more. But she didn't leave. Instead, she got out of the car. The rain soaked through her silk blouse in seconds. She didn't have an umbrella. She hadn't thought to bring one. She walked up the path to the front door. Her heels sank into the wet grass. Her hair plastered against her face. She looked nothing like a CEO. She looked like a woman who had lost something and didn't know how to get it back. She rang the doorbell. The wait felt eternal. She stood there, rain streaming down her face, her carefully constructed armor dissolving with every drop. This was insane. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar company, standing on a stranger's porch like a teenager hoping to be asked to prom. But James wasn't a stranger. That was the problem. Somewhere between the late-night phone calls and the quiet moments in the office, he had become something else. Something she didn't have a word for. The door opened. James stood in the doorway wearing a faded college t-shirt and sweatpants. His feet were bare. He looked at her with an expression of complete shock, as if she were a ghost, an apparition that couldn't possibly be real. "Rachel." She opened her mouth to speak, and for a moment nothing came out. All the speeches she had prepared in the car, all the arguments and explanations and carefully crafted words, none of them mattered anymore. She took a breath, felt the rain running down her face, and said the only thing that was true. "I accepted you quitting, but I won't accept losing you." James stood in the doorway, unable to move. Rain poured down behind Rachel, drumming against the porch roof, but she didn't seem to notice. Her silk blouse clung to her skin. Her blonde hair hung in wet strands around her face. She looked nothing like the woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals. She looked human, looked vulnerable, terrified. "What are you doing here?" James finally managed. "I don't know." Rachel's voice cracked slightly. "I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to figure that out. I watched you through the window with your son. I told myself to leave. I couldn't." James glanced behind him toward the stairs where Marcus was sleeping, then back at her. "You're soaking wet." "I didn't bring an umbrella." "The CEO of Samuel Industries doesn't own an umbrella." "I have 7 umbrellas. I forgot all of them." A ghost of a smile crossed her face, then disappeared. "I wasn't thinking clearly." James stepped back from the door but didn't invite her in. He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Is this pity? Because I don't need your pity." "It's not pity." "Then what is it? I'm a former employee. I worked under you for years. We had some late-night phone calls about quarterly reports." "That doesn't explain why you're standing on my porch at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night." Rachel met his gaze. "Those calls stopped being about quarterly reports a long time ago. You know that." James did know. He had known it even as it was happening, the way their conversations had shifted, the silences that stretched longer than they should have, the questions that had nothing to do with work. But acknowledging it now meant acknowledging something else, something complicated, something that scared him. "You're the CEO," he said. "I was your employee. Do you understand how that looks?" "I understand exactly how it looks. I've spent the last 17 days thinking about how it looks, about what people will say, about whether I'm crossing a line that can't be uncrossed." Rachel took a breath, and James saw her hands trembling at her sides. "And then I realized something. I've spent my entire life making decisions based on how things look, on what's appropriate, on what's expected. And I'm tired of it. This isn't just about you and me." James's voice hardened. "I have a son, a 6-year-old who just lost his mother 2 years ago. He doesn't need another person walking into his life and then walking out when things get hard." "I know." "Do you? Because this isn't a project. This isn't a merger you can restructure if it doesn't work out. If you step into that boy's life, you don't get to leave, not without breaking him." Rachel flinched. The words hit her harder than James had intended, but he didn't take them back. He needed her to understand. Marcus had already lost too much. James would not let anyone else hurt him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain continued to fall, and Rachel stood in it, making no move to shield herself. "When I was 10 years old," she said quietly, "my mother left. She couldn't compete with my father's company anymore. She tried for years, but he was never home, never present. So one day she just stopped trying." Rachel's eyes glistened, and James couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. "I stayed with my father. I told myself it was because I loved him. But the truth is I was afraid. Afraid that if I left too, he would have no one, and I would be alone." James said nothing. He waited. "I learned something from that," Rachel continued. "I learned that if you want to keep people from leaving, you have to have power over them, control. I built my entire life around that lesson. I became someone no one could leave because everyone needed something from me." She shook her head slowly. "And now I'm 38 years old, and I have everything I was supposed to want, and I'm completely alone. Rachel, I'm not telling you this because I want your sympathy. I'm telling you because I need you to understand why I'm here." She stepped closer, and for the first time, James saw the fear in her eyes, raw, unguarded fear. "I didn't come here to get you back to work. I didn't come here to offer you another raise or another flexible schedule. I came here because for the first time in my life I met someone who saw through all of it, who talked to me like I was just a person, not a CEO, not a Samuel, just Rachel. And what do you want from me? I don't want anything from you. I just don't want to disappear from your life." Her voice broke on the last word. Or your sons?" Before James could respond, a small voice came from behind him. "Daddy!" He turned. Marcus stood at the bottom of the stairs, his stuffed elephant clutched against his chest, his eyes heavy with sleep. He was looking at Rachel with the curiosity of a child who didn't understand social boundaries or complicated histories. "Hey, buddy." James walked over and crouched down to Marcus's level. "What are you doing up?" "I heard talking." Marcus peered around his father at the woman in the doorway. "Who's that?" James glanced back at Rachel. She stood frozen, uncertain, completely out of her element. The woman who negotiated with Fortune 500 executives was rendered speechless by a 6-year-old in dinosaur pajamas. "That's—" James hesitated. "That's a friend of Daddy's." Marcus considered this information. Then he padded across the floor in his bare feet, stopping a few steps from the door. He looked up at Rachel with the directness that only children possess. "You're wet," he observed. Rachel let out a small laugh, nervous, surprised. "Yes, I forgot my umbrella." "That's silly. It's raining." "You're right." It was very silly. Marcus tilted his head, studying her. "Are you going to stay?" "Daddy makes really good pancakes for breakfast." Rachel looked at James, and in her eyes he saw the question she couldn't bring herself to ask, the hope she was afraid to voice. "I don't know, buddy," James said softly. "That's up to the lady." Rachel crouched down, bringing herself to Marcus's eye level. When she spoke, her voice was gentler than James had ever heard it. "I would like that very much, but only if it's okay with you and your daddy." Marcus thought about this for a moment. Then he nodded seriously. "Okay, but you have to take off your wet shoes. Daddy doesn't like wet shoes in the house." Something shifted in Rachel's expression, a crack in the armor she had worn for so long. Her eyes glistened again, and this time James was certain it wasn't the rain. "I can do that," she whispered. James watched the exchange, and something shifted in him, too. He had spent the last 17 days convincing himself that walking away was the right choice, that he didn't need anyone except Marcus, that letting someone in would only lead to more pain. But watching Rachel kneel on his porch, speaking to his son with a tenderness he hadn't known she possessed, he realized something. She wasn't here as a CEO. She wasn't here with power or leverage or an exit strategy. She was here as a woman who had driven through the rain because she couldn't stay away, a woman who was risking everything just to have a chance. That took courage, more courage than any boardroom negotiation. "Marcus," James said, "why don't you go pick out a book for bedtime? I'll be up in a minute to read it to you." Marcus looked between his father and Rachel one more time. Then he turned and scampered up the stairs, his elephant bouncing against his side. When he was gone, James turned back to Rachel. She was still kneeling on the wet porch, looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I don't need a CEO," he said quietly. "And my son doesn't need someone who's going to treat this like a business arrangement." "I know. If you walk through that door, you're not walking into a company. You're walking into a family. There's no restructuring, no quarterly reviews, no exit strategy." "I know," she repeated, "and I don't know what this is. I don't know what we are. I just know that I'm not going to figure it out while you're standing in the rain." James stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in. You're getting soaked." Rachel rose slowly. She looked at the open door, then at James. For a moment she didn't move, as if she couldn't quite believe the invitation was real. Then she stepped inside. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. James stood at the stove making scrambled eggs and toast. The smell of coffee filled the room. At the table, Marcus was drawing. His crayons were scattered across the surface, and he was bent over his paper with the intense concentration of a child creating something important. Rachel sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. It was a plain ceramic mug, nothing like the expensive cups in her penthouse. Her hair was still slightly damp from the shower. She was wearing one of James's old sweatshirts, the sleeves rolled up past her wrists. She looked more at peace than she had in years. "Finished," Marcus announced. He held up his drawing proudly. James walked over, spatula still in hand. He looked at the paper and his breath caught. 3 figures, a tall man, a small boy, and a woman with yellow hair standing beside them. "That's us," Marcus explained, pointing to each figure. "That's Daddy, that's me, and that's Rachel." Rachel stared at the drawing, her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "Do you like it?" Marcus asked, suddenly uncertain. She reached out and took the paper gently, as if it were made of glass. "I love it," she whispered. "I love it so much." James set down the spatula. He walked to the table and put his hand on Rachel's shoulder. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. Marcus beamed and reached for another crayon, already starting his next masterpiece. James looked at the scene before him, his son drawing at the kitchen table this woman who had shown up at his door with nothing but honesty and hope, and he understood something he had been too afraid to believe. He had thought he would have to choose. Career or family, security or presence, the world or his son. But standing in his kitchen on that quiet morning, he realized the truth. The right choice doesn't take everything away. It brings the right things closer.